As difficult as it is to leave behind the 23-24 roster, it's time to set the table for what's ahead. So, what does the scholarship count currently look like?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. You're joining us at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and I want to thank you so much for making us your first listen or watch. Big shout out to all you everydayers out there. So coming up on the show today, as I said, we're going to be looking at the current scholarship count. This is something I love to do in the offseason. I know a lot of you do too. You want to look ahead and predict the roster and lineups and all sorts of stuff like that. So we're going to talk about, with what we know today, what will the lineups probably look like come November? Also want to talk about, because obviously the transfer portal is a massive part of our conversations this time of year. I don't like the timing of it, and I want to have a conversation about that. So we're going to do that toward the end of the show today. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well, so stay with us for that. But before we get into scholarship count tracking, it is Tuesday, and that means, friends, it is Trivia Tuesday. Yes, time for our weekly trivia question. Here it is. RJ Davis finished this season with 433 career assists, 16th in Carolina history. So the question is very simple. Who are the 15 players ahead of them? I'm not even going to make you name how many assists they have or count how many assists they have, just the names of the players, because there's a whole bunch you could probably get, and I just think it'd be fun. So who are the 15 players ahead of RJ Davis in all-time assists at North Carolina? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. If you're kind of new to joining us, I regularly create a scholarship count chart every time there's movement or there's a new player in or out, as Carolina gets a commitment from the transfer portal or high school, or somebody enters the transfer portal or anything like that. So, by the way, if you're a regular listener, no problem. I'm going to be describing everything, but this would be an interesting one for you to watch as well on YouTube, because I've just pulled up the scholarship availability chart for us to be able to watch. So I color code this thing for those of you that are watching it that have maybe never seen it before, with green for freshmen, blue for sophomores, yellowish for juniors, orange for seniors, and then red for super seniors, which will kind of be going away after this year. So as a reminder for everyone out there, you get 13 scholarships that you can dole out however you want to. These are one-year commitments. If Carolina wants to recruit RJ Davis, give him a scholarship for the 2023-24 season, and he's not been good, so we're going to take it away next season. That's obviously hilarious and not true, but they're not beholden to giving that scholarship all 4 years. Now, as we look at this thing, right now what I've done is removed the scholarship players from this year's roster who are out of eligibility. There are 3 of them. Obviously, Armando Bacot, along with Cormac Ryan and Paxson Wojcik. And so with the before the freshmen, I had moved into this, Carolina had 11 scholarships they had fulfilled last year and didn't give any others out to scholarship level players. So just those 11 were accounted for at the scholarship player level. So those 3 players out of eligibility. Every other scholarship player, the other 8, all can return. They all have eligibility left. Everyone else other than Mondo, Cormac, and Paxson. And then obviously you filter in the 3 incoming freshmen that we already know about, James Brown, and then Ian Jackson and Drake Powell, who are both competing in the McDonald's All-American activities today, Tuesday, later on tonight. So I'll have as much as we can get from that on Wednesday show. So just be on the watch out for that. So basically 3 in, 3 out. Right now, Carolina has accounted for 11 of their 13 scholarships. That's where it sits as of Tuesday, April 2nd. Now, you well know, as we all experienced last offseason, the numbers can change quickly with people going in and out. Now, I do not expect there to be the same outflow that Carolina had last year, and we would have already seen that. It was very quick after Selection Sunday where we started getting names into the transfer portal. And as of yet, we don't know anything official about anyone other than the guys that are out of eligibility. We haven't heard anything from RJ or Jae'lyn Withers about them using that COVID year of eligibility. We haven't heard anything from RJ or Harrison or anyone about testing the NBA draft process. We will hear all of these things, but as of right now, this is a snapshot in time. We have nothing from the 8 that can return. And so for now, just including them on our chart here, along with the 3 incoming freshmen. So basically the way it sets up, let's work our way from freshman up. If we're including RJ Davis and Jae'lyn Withers, which we're going to do for now, you've got the 3 freshmen, Brown, Jackson, and Drake Powell that we've already mentioned, 2 returning sophomores, that's Elliot Cadeau and Zayden High, 2 returning upcoming sophomores, I should say, about Cadeau and High, 2 upcoming juniors, that'll be Seth Trimble and Jalen Washington, 2 rising upcoming seniors, 4th-year seniors, that's Harrison Ingram and James Okonkwo, and then 2 who are also capable of using that 5th year of COVID eligibility. That's RJ Davis and Jae'lyn Withers. Let me also remind you that their class is the last one that has that COVID year. So the rising seniors, Harrison, Ingram, James Okonkwo, that class does not have COVID eligibility. So that's it for them. And then we're just kind of back to normal with 4 years of eligibility for players. So as we look at this, that is the 8 potential returners plus 3 freshmen. That's 11. You get 13 scholarships. So that means if all of these guys decide to come back, that's 2 available scholarships that Hubert Davis and the staff has to work with. Now, last year, as we've already talked about, they stayed there. They did not take any more because in this day and age, the thinking is if we're going to get guys and not play them, they're going to peace out. So why waste the time outside of depth? And so that's what the staff chose to do last year. We'll see what happens this year. I think it's going to change from year to year, but I expect that not only North Carolina, but most teams around the country will not continue to use all 13 of their scholarships. Roster construction just doesn't make sense in that way anymore. And so I would imagine most times you'll see those last 1, 2, 3 scholarships going to walk-ons. Now, I've also created a version of this chart that I'm going to switch to in the event that both RJ Davis and Jae'lyn Withers do not return, that they decide to move on to professional opportunities or transfer portal or whatever. I mean, everything's on the table if we're being honest. And I didn't create one with one or the other because obviously we can figure out that math very quickly. But if you take out RJ Davis and Jae'lyn Withers from the equation, you're left with just these 9. Ingram and Okonkwo as seniors, Trimble and Washington as juniors, High and Cadeau as sophomores, and then the 3 freshmen, Brown, Jackson, and Drake Powell. And then that would leave open 4 scholarships. So that's kind of where the math is right now. Now, I'm going to switch back on our YouTube for those watching to the version that has Davis and Withers. I just wanted to show you that basically if they both stay, it's 2. If one stays, one leaves, that's 3 available. And if they both leave, that's 4 available. And obviously the same would be true of anybody else that left. And so that's where we're at as of today. And so for those of you who are new to this, again, I will update this after every single roster change. I'll post it on Twitter. We'll talk about it here on the show, and you can come look at it. You can interact with it and kind of see what happens. Also, for those who are not watching, the other thing that I do is I take it on out at what is possible. So I show out through the 25-26, 26-27, and 27-28 season, which would be when James Brownie and Jackson and Drake Powell are seniors. And so obviously it's going to change. It's just what is in place right now. So just hear that and understand it. And that's where we're at. Okay. So that's where the scholarship count is at again today as of Tuesday, April 2nd. But now that we've taken a look at that current makeup of the scholarship count, what could we expect lineups to look like if it was these 11 young men playing for Carolina's roster next year? Obviously, it probably will change to some level or some degree, but we're not going to speculate on that right now. We're just going to work on what is right in front of us. So we're going to set that up. I'll tell you my thoughts on it in just a second. Right after I tell you about LinkedIn, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for your role. So I got to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Thankfully, LinkedIn isn't just some other job board. They've got a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, making it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you just can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process super easy and intuitive. And hiring really is that easy when you get so many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses often wear so many hats, just might not have the time or resources to hire. So they're always finding ways to make that process easier. For example, they just launched a new feature to help you with writing job descriptions. How neat is that? So post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Once again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So now, having taken a look at where the scholarship math stands today, let's take a look at if these 11 young men that we just talked about are the ones that are on the roster, which we expect to change, but let's just live in this hypothetical world. What might some of the lineups look like? What could we expect? I've got 3 different options I want to propose for us, and all of them are honestly based around Harrison Ingram's flexibility positionally. So we're going to start with him. Option 1 of these 3 that I've got for you is with Harrison Ingram at the 4 as he played this year. And so my look at this is that Elliot would be the 1, Elliot Cadeau, RJ Davis the 2. That makes sense. It's what happened this year. I don't see anyone supplanting that. Harrison Ingram at the 4. And as of right now, I would have Jalen Washington at the 5 in this first scenario with Harrison Ingram at the 4. And then starting at the 3 guard in that scenario, I could see a couple different possibilities with this Harrison Ingram at the 4 option. I could see Coach Davis wanting to roll an interesting guard-heavy lineup in which he uses the veteran savvy of Seth Trimble as the starting 3. So that would be Elliot Cadeau, RJ Davis, Seth Trimble in the backcourt, along with Harrison Ingram and Jalen Washington in the front court. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of clamoring for Ian Jackson and or Drake Powell to be in the starting lineup. But I just want to pump the brakes at least a little bit on that. Let's even think to this past year. Elliot Cadeau. How often did you hear this kind of phrase used? Elliot Cadeau would not reclassify to come and not start. Well, he didn't for the first little bit of this season. If you'll remember back, Paxson Wojcik did. Eventually and wisely, Elliot moves into the starting lineup after he just had some reps and experience under his belt. And so I don't want to assume either side of this, either that Ian and or Drake are going to be ready to start from day one, but I also don't want to assume that they're not going to be ready to start from day one, because we'll just have to wait and see what happens with those guys. But I like the possibilities here of, look, you could go Elliot, RJ, and Seth and have a lot of veteran savvy there with, again, Harrison at the 4. This lineup hinges around Harrison at the 4. And even if you start Seth, what a luxury to have players like Ian Jackson and Drake Powell then coming off the bench. Come on. So that's option 1, all based around Harrison Ingram at the 4. Option 2 is all based around Harrison Ingram at the 3, his more natural position that he's typically played. Although I thought he handled the power forward, small ball 4 really nicely last season. So option 2, as the others are all going to, starts with Elliot Cadeau and RJ Davis at point guard and shooting guard, the 1 and 2. In this scenario, then, as I said, we're moving Harrison Ingram to the 3. And then what I would most likely do in that scenario is the Jalen's at 4 and 5, Jay Witt at the 4, Jay Wash at the 5. Now, some of that is going to depend on Jay Witt's continued growth and his ability to impact the game and make wise decisions. And I know we're all hearing that right now and thinking back to that 3-pointer he took against Alabama, which shouldn't have happened. But I'm thinking even bigger than that. There are just times when Jae'lyn Withers is locked in, gets his role, understands it, and is doing exactly what he needs to do to help the team. There were so many times down the stretch of this year where it really felt like he got it and it clicked. But then there's others where he's trying to dribble too much, maybe taking ill-advised shots here or there, just a defensive lapse, things of that nature that would put the team in trouble. If he can get past those things and get those out of his system, I think it could be a really athletic and dynamic front court with the Jae'lyns in this scenario where you've got Harrison Ingram as a massive small forward, right? Like how crazy would that be? So that's another potential starting lineup. We've looked at it with Harrison Ingram at the 4. We've looked at it with Harrison Ingram at the 3. Again, that one was Elliot Cadeau, RJ Davis, Harrison Ingram, and the Jalen's Withers and Washington at the 4 and 5. And then the other possible scenario, and this one is a little bit crazy here, but I kind of like it. Option 3 is a scenario, a lineup with Harrison Ingram as the starting 5. Very small ball. Think Draymond Green at the 5 for the Warriors. Like that's the kind of thing we're talking about. If you went with that option, here's what I could see that you could do. I don't think you would have Jalen Washington in the mix in this scenario because I don't think it makes sense. Like it just isn't natural to play Jalen Washington at the 4 and Harrison Ingram at the 5. You would just flip-flop them, right? So in this scenario with Harrison Ingram at the 5, I would still have Cadeau and RJ Davis at the 1 and the 2. And then really in this lineup, you've got a lot of flexibility at the 3 and 4. You could, I see 4 different people that you might start in this combination. Seth Trimble, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell, Jae'lyn Withers. Some 2 of those 4 at the small forward and power forward positions with Harrison Ingram at the 5 is really interesting to me. Like if you had Jae'lyn Withers at the 4 and then really any of those other guys at the 3 could be interesting. Now with Jalen at the 4, you probably want your best shooter. So it's going to depend on just how Ian Jackson's 3-point shooting continues to come along. It's going to depend on where Drake's shooting continues to grow. And Seth's, like what a tremendous growth Seth had from freshman year to sophomore year from outside. So there's a lot of possibility and flexibility with that lineup. It's like what we're going to have to wait almost till we see it on the floor to how all those pieces work together. But if you could go really small, four guard lineup of some form around Harrison Ingram, look, I know he gives up a lot of weight to DJ Burns, but he's the same height as DJ Burns. There's no reason why you couldn't look at Harrison and say, let's go small ball 5. Let's have fun and just outrun everyone. That's a very real possibility for an option lineup. I'm just so intrigued that as I started putting these lineups together, it started to uncover for me all the lineup flexibility Carolina has, specifically because of the presence of Harrison Ingram at the 3, 4, or 5. So keep your eyes out on that. Now, I've said all that. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and your ideas about Carolina's lineups and what you would be interested in seeing. Drop it in the chat for those of you watching on YouTube. Reach out to me. Those of you listening would love to hear it. So to me, the guarantees with this 11 players are Elliot Cadeau and RJ Davis in any lineup. Harrison Ingram in any lineup, but it could be anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5. And so that's 3 of your 5 starters to me. And then the other starters to me at this point would come from some combination of the following 5 players: Seth Trimble, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell, or one of the Jalen's. So 2 of those 5 players to me right now with this roster construction are your other 2 starters. And then the other depth, you obviously have James Okonkwo, Zayden High, who I'm really interested to see his progression from freshman to sophomore, and James Brown as well. At this point, I don't necessarily imagine James Brown will contribute much next year, but we got to watch for it and see what he has to bring to the table. So that then leaves 2 other scholarships, which you may or may not utilize. Now, all of this said, I know I've been saying we're talking about what's on the roster. I really do expect the Tar Heels to go after a center in the portal, a portal center. When I look at this roster, I think that is a key piece missing. And maybe that's because there's a big, massive Armando Bacot sized hole that's glaring at you. Maybe the coaching staff is thinking we can ride with Jalen Washington and James Okonkwo and James Brown, and we'll be in good shape. So I don't see that right now, but we'll have to wait and see. But that's my expectation, is I fully expect the Tar Heels to go after a portal center. Now, obviously, again, one more time, let me say it. All of this changes when people come in or go out or whatever it's going to be, whether it's NBA draft testing, transfer portal, any of that. We'll have to retake a look at this, but this is where it sits today in, pretty fresh 5 days after Carolina ends their season at the hands of Alabama. Now, speaking of the transfer portal, part of the conversation right now and going into future concerns for future seasons is the opening date of the transfer portal. How can we make this work more capably across Division I? That is a question I want to try to answer, and we'll do that in just a second. Right after I tell you about eBay Motors, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time, or you get your money back guaranteed. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. I've got thoughts on the transfer portal. I think it's great for the players. I think it's great for player autonomy. We even went this year from where you could transfer once to they kind of put anything on the table. Mid-season, we got a bunch of 2-year transfers that were suddenly eligible, and then nothing ever changed. So right now, that's still where we're at. Portal madness. It's always going crazy. And also revisited was the length, the duration of the transfer portal, and the opening day of it. Ultimately, they reduced it from 60 to 45 days. But I also, more importantly, wanted the NCAA to move the opening day of the transfer portal to a location, a time, a starting point that made more sense across the board. So part of this is the transfer portal opens the Monday, the day right after Selection Sunday, which is part of why Carolina ultimately opted not to play in the NIT last year, things like that. So we'll get more to that we'll get to more on that conversation in just a second. And so what they did is when they kept the 45 days, they lopped off the back 15 and started it at the same spot. My kind of thought is I don't care what the hard math is. The loosey-goosey math is I would rather keep the back end and lop off the front, start it 15 days later. So that's question number one. I got 4 observations, 4 parts of this conversation that I want to have, and then we'll get out of here after the Trivia Tuesday answer as well. So number one, when would be a better time to open the transfer portal? I've got 3 options. Number one for me would be Monday, the day after the Final Four is set. So like yesterday. That way we're down to just 4 teams remaining. And while they've got one more week of prep, it seems like it's a good time for it. Another would be a week from today, next Tuesday, the day after the national championship game. That way every team is done playing. It's over, and now we're all on the same page. We've all got the same amount of time to devote to recruiting, and so that's something to look at. The third one, and I kind of like this one too, is Monday, exactly 1 week after the national championship. I don't think we'll ever get to that, but here's why. From a content standpoint, from a news cycle standpoint, I like the idea of the national championship being played on Monday night and then getting that whole week's worth of content. And then the next week, we open the transfer portal and it lives kind of on its own. So one of those 3 times for me would be the better time to open it. So that's number one. Number 2, let me put this in terms, think about how crazy it is for it to start when it does by me comparing it to a professional sport. The Major League Baseball season just started at the end of last week. So let's think about this. MLB season ends end of a regular season is Sunday, and then we get Monday, and then playoffs start Tuesday, if I'm thinking correctly. So basically, if this was baseball, the regular season, game 162 would end on a Sunday. Free agency would start the next day, and then the baseball playoffs would start the day after that and would go all throughout November. There's no world in which the MLB is going to open free agency the day after the regular season ends. That's just silly. What about the NBA? It's the same sport. What if the NBA regular season ends, we're getting ready for the play-in tournament and then the actual NBA playoffs, which take like a third of a season themselves. But we said, you know what, the day after, let's go ahead and start the NBA free agency cycle. That just makes sense to do right now while over half the teams are focusing on the postseason. No, that doesn't make any sense. I could do the same thing with the NFL, right? As we finish the regular season, getting ready for Wild Card Sunday coming up. But let's go ahead and start free agency. We don't even know the outcome of this year's playoffs, but let's go ahead and get it going. That just makes zero sense. So when you compare it to that, it's absolutely ludicrous to think about a world in which you start free agency the day after the regular season ends. That to me is silly. And I like the day after in college basketball, the day after conference tournaments end. Let's put it that way. And that, like the professional stuff we're talking about, is with a more manageable 30-ish teams. We're talking about 362 teams here that we're dealing with. So it's just bonkers to think about when you put it in those terms. Number 3 observation here. When you put it where you put it, when it's open right now, coaching staffs are being asked to divide their time between focusing on their next game, whenever that is, and paying attention to the transfer portal. So let's say it's a Tuesday, you've got 12 hours to work. You shouldn't have to sit as an assistant coach and think, all right, how am I going to divide this time? I think I'll give 6 hours devoted to scouting the team we're playing this weekend. And then another 6 hours to recruiting, covering the transfer portal, seeing who might fit us next year when we have no idea yet what we need. But then you start thinking, well, if I've divided my 6 hours in 6 hours, what if our opponent is giving 7 hours to preparing for the game and just 5 hours to recruiting? Well, then that means I better give 8 hours to preparing for the game. And you see what we're forcing these coaches to do is not good and it's not right. But then you start thinking, but if I spend all this time on preparing for my game, which is the most important thing, then school X is all in on that player from the transfer portal because they're done and they can afford all of their time to go to the transfer portal. That's not how this should work, folks. As an example, Gonzaga literally got a portal commitment before they were out of the NCAA tournament. It should not have to be that way. And number 4 thing, we saw this last year with Carolina, but this is what's killing the NIT, at least in large part. You saw the Tar Heels make this decision last year. This year, the list grew by a lot of teams just saying, we're good. Because what good is the NIT? It's not even like they don't even play the semifinals at Madison Square Garden anymore. That was a big part of the draw. Now there's nothing like that. And part of it too, the other thing is the NCAA has always given the regular season champions an auto bid to the NIT, even from the mid-major like conferences. They pulled that away this year. But then you also get all these major conference teams now, the teams that they were hoping to get in the NIT, they're like, no, we're not playing in your tournament because you're forcing us to open the transfer portal right now. And this tournament doesn't matter. All due respect to the NIT, but it just doesn't matter anymore. It did at one point. It doesn't now. And so the NCAA's own decisions are what's coming back to bite them. The NIT doesn't mean enough. These teams, just like Carolina did last year, would rather devote all of their time and resources and energy to just saying, you know what? This season's done. We're done. Let's move on altogether. And I think we can all agree on that. So, NCAA, you didn't make the decision to change the date last year. You need to this year. Make the right decision. Come on, let's do this. Let's move it back. It should not start. The transfer portal should not open the Monday, the day after Selection Sunday. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. All right, Tuesday trivia answer. RJ Davis finished the season with 433 career assists, 16th in Carolina history. Who are the 15 men above him? Let's go from 15 up to number 1. You've probably named a bunch of these. If you haven't yet, pause it, scribble it down, see how many you can name. Write it in your notes app on your phone. All right, here we go. Number 15, working all the way up to number 1. Jeff McInnes, Matt Doherty, Joel Berry, the second, Steve Hale, Jimmy Black, Coach Jeff Lebo, Kendall Marshall, Marcus Page, Ty Lawson. I mean, this is a list, folks. King Rice, Derek Phelps, Raymond Felton, and then the top 3, Phil Ford, Kenny Smith, and number 1, say it together, Ed Cota. That is a list of Tar Heels royalty. Obviously, if RJ decides to come back for a 5th year, he's going to rocket even further up this list. Friends, that's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. Thanks so much for joining in today's show. Again, I want to hear your feedback from all that roster construction and lineup construction conversation we had. What would you go with? Where do you think I'm right? Where do you think I'm wrong? Where do we agree and disagree? You can also tell me your answers to that in the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community, which is free to join. The links in the show notes. It is an incredible community of people talking Carolina sports all the time. Come join us. We'd love to have you. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the show, please do that. It's so easy to do on audio or on video for those of you watching. The subscribe button on YouTube is right down there in the bottom corner. Hit subscribe. All right, guys, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We're going to keep talking about everything going on under the sun. But until Wednesday, when we're back together, peace.